Deep in the Cascade Mountains, where morning mist clings to ancient pines, sits a cabin that doesn't exist on any map. Sarah Chen pushes through the undergrowth, her torn jacket catching on thorns when she sees it, weathered cedar walls, a stone chimney, windows dark as secrets. She's been living under bridges for 3 years, but something about this place feels hauntingly familiar. The door swings open at a touch, revealing furniture thick with dust and photographs she recognizes but shouldn't. Her own face stares back from a wedding picture she has no memory of taking. On the mantel, a deed bears her name, a name she thought she'd abandoned forever. But Sarah Chen isn't just a homeless woman seeking shelter. She's Dr. Sarah Chen, former NSA cryptographer who uncovered something so dangerous that powerful people erased her entire identity and left her to die on the streets. The cabin holds the evidence that could bring down a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of government. Now footsteps crunch through the forest outside. They've found her again. But this time, will Sarah remember enough of who she really is to survive? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted the wedding photograph. The woman in white silk looked radiant, impossibly happy, nothing like the hollow-eyed vagrant she'd become. Beside her stood a man with kind eyes and sandy hair, his arm protective around her waist. She traced his face with a dirt-stained finger, waiting for recognition that never came. The footsteps outside grew closer, deliberate and measured. Sarah's survival instincts, honed by years of hiding in urban shadows, screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. This cabin, this impossible forgotten place, held her captive with its mysteries. She set the photograph down and noticed a loose floorboard beneath the Persian rug. Her fingers found the edge without conscious thought, as if muscle memory had awakened after a long sleep. The board lifted easily, revealing a metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, flash drives, documents, and a pistol that felt familiar in her grip despite her memory's silence. A manila folder contained surveillance photos of men in expensive suits, their faces circled in red ink. Notes in her own handwriting covered the margins, coordinates, dates, encrypted references she couldn't decode. One photo stopped her cold. Senator Marcus Webb, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, shaking hands with a man she somehow knew was called Volkov. Her notes dated this meeting 3 days before the Kremlin bombing that killed 2 American diplomats. Webb was supposed to be at that embassy. The notes made that clear. Why wasn't he there? A twig snapped outside the window. Sarah stuffed the documents into her jacket and crept toward the back of the cabin. Through grimy glass, she counted 3 figures in black tactical gear moving through the trees, professional, patient. They'd surrounded the place. Her mind raced, fragments of training surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. Check exits, count hostiles, find cover. The knowledge felt foreign yet automatic, as if someone else's expertise had been grafted onto her damaged psyche. The cabin's back door opened onto a narrow porch overlooking a ravine. 30-foot drop to rocky water below, not ideal, but possible. She'd survived worse these past 3 years, though she couldn't remember how. Voices drifted from the front of the cabin. Motion sensors confirmed she's inside. Remember, we need her alive until we recover the data. Sarah's blood chilled. They weren't just hunting her, they needed something she possessed. But what? The flash drives felt heavy in her pocket, their contents as opaque as her stolen memories. She eased onto the porch, testing each board before trusting it with her weight. The ravine yawned below, morning mist rising from the water like ghostly fingers. Behind her, the front door exploded inward with a crash of splintered wood. Clear the rooms. Check every corner. No choice now. Sarah vaulted the porch railing just as shouts erupted behind her. Gravity claimed her, wind rushing past as she fell toward the rocks below. At the last second, muscle memory kicked in. She twisted, arms protecting her head, legs absorbing the impact. The icy water shocked her system but also clarified it. As she surfaced, gasping, more fragments returned. Swimming lessons at Fort Meade, a handler named Morrison, who always smelled like cigarettes and regret. The weight of discovering something so terrible it made sleeping impossible. Tactical lights swept the ravine from above, their beams cutting through the mist. Sarah let the current carry her downstream, fighting to stay conscious as the cold seeped into her bones. The documents in her jacket were probably ruined, but the flash drives might survive if their encryption was as good as she hoped. 3 years of enforced amnesia had protected her, kept her hidden in plain sight among society's invisible. But now the past was calling, demanding she remember who she'd been before they broke her mind and threw her away. The question was, did she want to answer? The cabin's floorboards groaned under Maya's tentative steps as she crossed the threshold. Dust motes danced in the filtered sunlight streaming through grimy windows, and the air carried the musty scent of abandonment mixed with something else, something familiar that made her chest tighten. She'd expected the interior to be as neglected as the exterior, but instead found a space that seemed frozen in time rather than forgotten. Furniture sat arranged as if someone had simply stepped out for a moment. A coffee cup rested on the kitchen counter, its contents long evaporated into a dark stain. Books lay open on the dining table, their pages yellowed but readable. Maya's fingers traced the spine of one volume, Advanced Cryptography, Theory and Application. The title sparked nothing in her conscious mind, yet her hands knew exactly where to find the bookmark, knew that page 247 contained a passage about frequency analysis that had once been highlighted in blue ink. The knowing terrified her. She moved deeper into the cabin, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden floors. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece above a stone fireplace, but the faces had been carefully scratched out with what looked like a key or knife. Only silhouettes remained, shadowy figures that might have been parents, siblings, friends, or enemies. In the largest frame, a woman's outline stood next to a tall man in what appeared to be formal wear. The woman's posture was confident, shoulders back, chin raised. Maya found herself mimicking the stance without realizing it, muscle memory asserting itself across an impossible gap in time. The bedroom door stood ajar, and Maya pushed it open with trembling fingers. Clothes hung in the closet, women's clothes in her exact size. Jeans, sweaters, a red dress that made her breath catch. She knew that dress. Had worn it to somewhere important, somewhere that mattered. On the nightstand, a leather journal lay open to a page covered in handwriting that looked disturbingly familiar. The entry was dated 3 years ago, around the time her memories began on the streets of Portland. They're getting closer. I can feel it in the way shadows move wrong, in the static on the radio when I tune to the old frequency. Marcus says I'm paranoid, but paranoia has kept me alive this long. If something happens to me, if I disappear or worse, the backup protocols are in place. The cabin will remember even if I can't. Maya's hands shook as she read her own words, written in her own hand, describing a life she couldn't remember living. She flipped through earlier pages, finding fragments of a story that made no sense, references to the project, mentions of encrypted files and government contracts, phone numbers written in code she somehow understood despite having no memory of learning it. A photograph fell from between the journal's pages, a clear shot of her own face, but wrong somehow. This version of herself looked polished, professional. She wore makeup and expensive clothes, her hair styled instead of hanging in unwashed tangles. But it was the eyes that stopped her cold. They held a hardness, a calculating intelligence that the Maya who begged for quarters outside convenience stores had never possessed. Or had she? The sound of an engine approaching made Maya freeze. Through the bedroom window, she watched a black sedan wind up the dirt road, moving too slowly, too deliberately, official, purposeful, dangerous. Instinct kicked in. Instinct she didn't know she possessed. Without conscious thought, she was moving, grabbing the journal and photograph, scanning for exits. The bedroom window was too high and too visible. The front door would put her directly in their path. But the kitchen had a back door she'd noticed, and beyond that, the forest offered cover. The sedan stopped 50 yards from the cabin. Two men emerged, both wearing dark suits despite the remote location and afternoon heat. They moved like professionals, one circling left while the other approached the front door directly. Maya caught a glimpse of the driver, older, with silver hair and cold eyes that seemed to look right through the cabin walls to where she crouched behind the kitchen counter. She knew that face. The recognition hit like a physical blow, bringing with it a flash of memory. The same man sitting across from her in a sterile white room, promising that the procedure would be painless, that she'd be happier not remembering, that some knowledge was too dangerous to keep. "Dr. Chen," she whispered, the name escaping before she could stop it. The men were at the door now. She heard the soft click of a lock being picked, professional and quick. They weren't here by accident, and they weren't leaving empty-handed. Maya clutched the journal to her chest and bolted for the back door. Her bare feet finding purchase on surfaces her conscious mind didn't recognize, but her body remembered perfectly. Behind her, she heard the cabin door open and voices discussing search patterns and containment protocols. Whatever she'd been before the streets claimed her, whatever secrets lay buried in her stolen past, she was about to discover that some people would kill to keep them hidden, and she was running out of places to hide. The floorboards creaked under Maya's weight as she stepped deeper into the cabin, her flashlight beam dancing across dust-covered furniture that seemed both foreign and achingly familiar. A leather armchair sat angled toward a stone fireplace, its surface worn smooth in places that suggested countless hours of use. On a side table, a coffee mug bore the faint outline of lipstick, a shade she somehow knew was called Crimson Midnight. Her hand moved to her own lips unconsciously. Had she worn that color once? The kitchen was small but well-appointed, copper pots hanging from hooks above a butcher block island. Maya opened the refrigerator, surprised to find it humming with electricity. Inside, a few bottles of water and some expired yogurts suggested someone had been here recently, but not in the past month or two. A utility bill on the counter made her freeze. The name printed at the top read Elena Vasquez, but that wasn't what stopped her cold. It was her own handwriting in the margin, a phone number scrawled in blue ink next to the words "Emergency Contact." Elena Vasquez. The name felt like a key turning in a rusted lock somewhere deep in her mind. She climbed the narrow staircase to the loft, each step releasing more memories like spores in the air. A queen-sized bed dominated the space, its navy comforter neat and untouched. But it was the desk by the window that drew her attention. 3 laptops sat closed beneath a layer of dust, and beside them a stack of file folders secured with a rubber band. Maya's fingers trembled as she pulled off the band. The top file contained photographs, surveillance shots of men in expensive suits entering and leaving various buildings. One face appeared repeatedly, a silver-haired man with pale eyes and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Someone had written Kozlov across the bottom in that same blue ink. The name hit her like a physical blow. Images flashed unbidden. The same man, younger, leaning across a mahogany desk. His voice, heavily accented, "You have something that belongs to me, Elena." Maya, Elena, dropped the photograph, backing away from the desk as if it were on fire. But the memories kept coming now, a dam finally bursting after years of careful containment. She remembered running through rain-slicked streets, clutching a briefcase to her chest, the screech of tires, gunshots, and then nothing. A void where her life used to be. Downstairs, a floorboard groaned. Elena's blood turned to ice. She hadn't made that sound. Moving silently to the loft's window, she peered down at the clearing. A black SUV sat beside her shopping cart, its engine ticking as it cooled. 3 figures moved through the trees, their flashlight beams sweeping systematically toward the cabin. They'd found her. Elena's training she didn't remember learning, kicked in automatically. She grabbed the files and shoved them into a waterproof bag she found in the closet. The laptops were too heavy, but she unplugged the hard drives with practiced efficiency, her fingers remembering the process even as her mind reeled. The front door rattled. Someone was testing the lock. Elena eased the loft window open and climbed onto the roof. The metal was slick with dew, and she had to move carefully to avoid making noise. Behind the cabin, the forest stretched dark and welcoming. She'd grown up in these woods, another memory surfacing at exactly the right moment. Glass shattered below. They were inside. "Search everything," a voice called out in accented English. Russian, she thought, though she couldn't remember how she knew that. She was here recently. The bed's been slept in. Elena lowered herself from the roof's edge, hanging by her fingertips for a moment before dropping silently to the pine needles below. The forest closed around her like an old friend, and she moved through it with surprising grace for someone who'd been sleeping on city streets for 3 years. She'd made it perhaps 50 yards when the explosion lit up the night sky behind her. The shockwave knocked her to her knees, and when she looked back, flames were already consuming the cabin's roof. They were erasing evidence, which meant they still didn't know how much she remembered. But Elena was starting to remember everything now. The briefcase, the files she'd hidden before they tried to kill her, the reason she'd spent 3 years believing she was a homeless woman named Maya instead of Elena Vasquez, cybersecurity specialist, and the only person who could prove Viktor Kozlov had been selling defense contracts to foreign governments. She pulled out one of the photographs she'd salvaged, studying Kozlov's scarred face in the orange glow of the burning cabin. He'd tried to erase her once and failed. Now he'd just made the mistake of reminding her exactly who she used to be. Elena Vasquez had been presumed dead for 3 years. It was time for her resurrection, and this time she'd be ready for war. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as memories crashed over her like a dam bursting. Dr. Elena Vasquez. The name carved itself into her consciousness with surgical precision, and suddenly she could taste copper pennies and hear the hum of fluorescent lights. She stumbled backward from the desk, her hip catching the corner. The pain grounded her, pulling her back from the edge of whatever abyss her mind had been teetering over. But the memories kept coming, fragments at first, then rushing torrents of images that made her stomach lurch. A laboratory. White coats moving with purpose. Her own voice, younger and confident, discussing molecular structures and enzyme reactions. The weight of a wedding ring on her finger, a ring that was no longer there, hadn't been there for years. Sarah pressed her palms against her temples, trying to stem the flow of information flooding her brain. She remembered now why she'd avoided mirrors for so long. It wasn't just the defeat she'd see reflected back. It was the fear of recognizing herself. The cabin's silence pressed against her ears as she forced herself to examine the photograph more closely. The woman in the lab coat had Sarah's eyes, her nose, but something else entirely in her expression. Purpose, intelligence, the kind of confidence that came from having answers instead of questions. A manila folder lay beneath where the photograph had been. Her fingers moved without conscious direction, opening it to reveal documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language, except she understood every word. Research notes, patent applications, chemical formulas that sparked recognition in corners of her mind she'd forgotten existed. The letterhead made her blood freeze. Meridian Pharmaceuticals. That name brought with it a cascade of new memories, darker ones, boardroom meetings that turned hostile, threats disguised as concern for her well-being, a man in an expensive suit telling her that some discoveries were too dangerous for the public good. Sarah sank into the leather chair behind the desk, her legs no longer willing to support her. The folder's contents spilled across the desktop, pages of research documenting something called Project Lazarus. Her handwriting filled the margins with notes and corrections, growing increasingly erratic as the dates progressed. The final entry was dated 3 years ago. The same week her memories began in that hospital bed, confused and broken, with no past and no future. A loose sheet of paper caught her attention, her own handwriting, but hurried, desperate. "They're coming. I should have destroyed everything, but I can't. Too many lives at stake. If something happens to me, if they succeed in silencing me, this research must survive. Project Lazarus could save millions, but in the wrong hands. God help us all. And the backup data is hidden where only I would think to look. Where we promised to meet if the world ended. E will understand. Trust no one else. Elena. The name brought a rush of warmth, of love tinged with loss. Not just a colleague, something deeper, someone who mattered more than professional success or personal safety. Sarah's hands moved to the desk drawers, muscle memory guiding her to hidden catches and false bottoms she shouldn't have known existed. In the deepest drawer, her fingers found a small device that looked like a modified thumb drive. The plastic was warm to her touch, as if it had been waiting for her return. Outside, a branch snapped. The sound cut through her revelation like a blade. Sarah froze, listening. The forest had gone quiet, no birds, no rustling leaves, just the heavy silence that preceded danger. Another snap, closer this time. Deliberate, human. They'd found her. Sarah's body moved with an efficiency that surprised her, sliding the research back into the folder and pocketing the drive. Her homeless person's instincts kicked in, always have an escape route, always be ready to run. But these weren't instincts born on the streets. This was older training, deeper knowledge surfacing like muscle memory. The cabin had other exits. She knew this without looking, the same way she'd known about the hidden panels and secret drawers. Through the kitchen, past the pantry, a door disguised as part of the wall. Voices outside now, low and professional, military precision in their movements. They'd surrounded the cabin, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They thought they were hunting a confused, broken homeless woman. They had no idea they'd awakened Dr. Elena Vasquez. Sarah, no, Elena, moved through the cabin like a ghost, gathering supplies she'd hidden years ago. A go-bag behind the false wall, cash, documents, a pistol she somehow knew how to use. The front door's handle turned slowly, professionally silent. Elena was already gone, melting into the forest through passages she'd prepared for exactly this moment. But this time, she wasn't running blind. This time, she had answers, and those answers were worth killing for. They'd stolen 3 years of her life, turned her into a ghost wandering the streets. Now it was time to remind them why they'd been so afraid of her in the first place. The hunt was far from over. It was just beginning. The photograph trembled in Maya's dirt-stained fingers as memories crashed over her like a violent tide. The woman in the image, her own face, younger and unmarked by years of street survival, smiled beside a man whose presence now made her stomach clench with inexplicable dread. Dr. Marcus Vance. The name surfaced from the depths of her fractured mind, like something crawling up from a grave. She stumbled backward from the desk, the journal clutched against her chest. The neat handwriting inside belonged to her, yet the words felt foreign, dangerous. References to Project Mindbridge and neural pathway manipulation filled page after page, accompanied by detailed sketches of brain scans and chemical formulas that somehow made perfect sense to her damaged mind. Outside, branches scraped against the cabin windows with increasing urgency. The storm was worsening, but Maya barely noticed. She was lost in the journal's revelations, piecing together fragments of a life deliberately erased. She had been Dr. Maya Chen, a neuroscientist working on classified government research. The project aimed to selectively delete traumatic memories from soldiers' minds, but something had gone catastrophically wrong. Her hands shook as she read her own account of discovering the darker truth. The military hadn't wanted to heal trauma. They wanted to create perfect assassins by erasing conscience, empathy, humanity itself. Maya Chen had tried to destroy the research, to expose the program, but Marcus had betrayed her first. A floorboard creaked behind her. Maya spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cabin remained empty, shadows dancing in the flickering lamplight. But the sound had been real, deliberate. Someone else was here. She extinguished the lamp with trembling fingers, plunging the room into darkness. Through the storm's howling, she heard it again, careful footsteps on the porch. They'd found her. After 3 years of believing Maya Chen was dead, buried in some unmarked grave along with her inconvenient conscience, they'd discovered their mistake. The front door handle turned slowly. Maya clutched the journal and backed toward the rear of the cabin, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She'd learned to move without sound during countless nights in abandoned buildings, hiding from predators both human and animal. That hard-earned skill might be all that kept her alive now. The door opened with a soft groan. A shadow filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing tactical gear. Maya recognized the silhouette even before he stepped inside. Agent Collins, Marcus's enforcer, the man who'd put a bullet in her head and left her for dead. Except the bullet had only grazed her skull, and the fall into the ravine had completed the job of destroying her memories that Marcus's experimental drugs had begun. Collins had reported her death, and Maya had awakened 3 days later with no knowledge of who she was or why someone wanted her dead. Collins moved through the cabin with professional efficiency, his weapon drawn. Maya pressed herself against the back wall, hardly daring to breathe. The journal felt heavy in her hands, 8 years of suppressed research and documentation of war crimes. No wonder they wanted her eliminated. Another figure appeared in the doorway. Maya's blood turned to ice as Dr. Marcus Vance stepped into the cabin, his silver hair immaculate despite the storm. He looked exactly as she remembered him, or as she now remembered remembering him. The same cold eyes, the same thin smile that had once charmed her into trusting him with her life's work. "She's been here," Marcus said quietly, examining the rumpled bedding, the scattered papers. "Recently. The lamp is still warm." Collins nodded toward the back of the cabin. Maya's throat constricted as he began moving in her direction. She had perhaps seconds before discovery, and nowhere to run. The storm raged outside, and even if she escaped into the woods, they would hunt her down with military precision. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic behind her, a hidden panel in the wall. The secret compartment slid open at her touch, revealing a narrow crawl space that led into darkness. Maya didn't hesitate. She slipped inside, pulling the panel closed just as Collins's flashlight beam swept across where she'd been standing. The space beyond was cramped and musty, part of an old smuggler's tunnel system that connected several cabins in these mountains. Maya Chen had discovered it years ago and modified it as an escape route, knowing that her research made her a target. The homeless woman she'd become had forgotten this contingency, but her body remembered the path through instinct and muscle memory. She crawled through the tunnel as voices echoed behind her, Marcus's cultured tones mixing with Collins's gruff responses. They were searching the cabin systematically, and it wouldn't be long before they found the hidden panel. Maya emerged from the tunnel 50 yards away, gasping in the rain-soaked darkness. She clutched the journal against her chest, its secrets burning like acid in her hands. She finally knew who she was, what she'd done, and why they wanted her dead. Now she had to decide whether to run again or fight back. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she studied the faces staring back at her. The woman in the center looked exactly like her, but younger, confident, wearing an expensive suit that screamed corporate success. Flanking her were 2 men, one tall and distinguished with silver hair, the other shorter with cold eyes that seemed to follow her even through the glossy paper. A sharp pain shot through her temple as she tried to focus on their faces. The harder she concentrated, the more her head pounded, as if something inside her skull was actively fighting against recognition. She set the photo down with shaking fingers and reached for the leather journal beneath it. The handwriting on the first page was unmistakably hers, though she couldn't remember forming these precise letters. "Project Blackwater, Day 1, it began. "The synthetic compound shows promise, but the human trials concern me. Marcus insists we're close to a breakthrough, but at what cost?" Sarah flipped through page after page of technical notes, formulas, and increasingly desperate entries. Her past self had been a biochemist, apparently working on something called Blackwater, a cognitive enhancement drug that could boost memory and intelligence dramatically. But the later entries told a different story. Day 47. Subject 12 experienced total memory failure after withdrawal. Marcus says it's temporary, but I've seen the brain scans. The damage looks permanent. Day 63, I confronted David about the missing funds. He claims the money went to equipment, but I know better. Someone's been selling our research. Day 78, they know I've been copying files. I have to get out. If anything happens to me, the evidence is hidden in... The entry cut off mid-sentence. Sarah's hands were shaking as she turned the page, but it was blank. She flipped frantically through the rest of the journal, finding only empty pages. A soft creak from above made her freeze. Footsteps on the cabin's roof, moving slowly, deliberately. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized how exposed she was in this underground room. There was only one way out, the same stairs she'd descended. The footsteps moved across the ceiling toward what she estimated was the front door. Sarah quickly grabbed the photograph and journal, stuffing them into her jacket. She needed to find whatever her past self had been trying to hide before these visitors, whoever they were, found her. The basement had more hiding places than she'd initially noticed. Behind the filing cabinet, she discovered a small wall safe, its digital display blinking red. Locked. She tried her birthday, at least the one from her fake ID, but nothing happened. The footsteps above had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. A memory fragment suddenly surfaced, standing in this same basement, her hands shaking as she programmed a combination into this very safe. The numbers came to her in a rush, 0 to 7, 1 to 5. Her fingers moved automatically across the keypad. The safe clicked open. Inside was a small hard drive, a thick envelope stuffed with cash, and a vial of clear liquid labeled Blackwater, Final Formula. Attached to the vial was a note in her handwriting. 1 dose permanently blocks traumatic memory formation. Antidote must be administered within 72 hours or effects become irreversible. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. She had taken this drug herself, or someone had forced her to take it. The memory loss, the years of confusion, the feeling that her life had started in that alley 3 years ago, it was all artificial. A loud crash from upstairs made her decision for her. She pocketed everything from the safe and looked around desperately for another exit. The basement seemed solid on all sides, but then she noticed an irregularity in the far wall, a section that looked newer than the rest. Pressing against it, she felt it give slightly. A hidden panel. She pushed harder, and it swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. Without hesitation, she crawled inside, pulling the panel shut behind her, just as she heard the basement door slam open above. "She's been here," a man's voice echoed down the stairs. "The safe's open." "Impossible," came a second voice, refined and familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. "Sarah Chen died 3 years ago. We made sure of that." Chen. Her real name was Sarah Chen. The sound of it triggered another flash of memory, standing in a boardroom, slamming her hand on a table, telling someone named Marcus that she wouldn't let him turn people into guinea pigs for profit. The tunnel was longer than expected, sloping upward and emerging behind a cluster of bushes about 50 yards from the cabin. She could see 2 black SUVs parked in the clearing and figures moving through the lit windows of her cabin. Professional, military-style efficiency. Sarah clutched the hard drive in her pocket. Whatever was on it had been worth destroying her entire life to hide. Now she needed to figure out what these people had done to her, and more importantly, what they were willing to do to get their research back. The question was whether she had 72 hours or 3 years to find that antidote. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Maya crept back toward the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every snap of a twig beneath her feet sounded like gunfire in the oppressive silence. The men's voices had faded, but she knew they were still out there, circling like wolves who'd caught her scent. She pressed herself against a massive pine tree, its rough bark biting through her thin jacket. Through the gaps between branches, she could see the cabin's windows glowing warmly in the darkness, a beacon that now felt more like a trap. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of having nowhere to go, she'd finally found a place that belonged to her, only to discover it came with a death sentence attached. The photographs scattered across the cabin floor flashed through her mind again. Her face, younger and polished, standing beside people she couldn't remember. The woman with the knowing smile, the documents bearing her signature, signatures she had no memory of making. Each image was a puzzle piece to a life that felt foreign yet undeniably hers. A branch snapped somewhere to her left. Maya froze, forcing herself to breathe quietly through her nose. Footsteps crunched through dead leaves, deliberate and measured. Professional. "She's got to be here somewhere," a voice drifted through the trees. Male, gravelly, with an accent she couldn't quite place. The fire was still warm. Victor said no witnesses this time. Another voice, younger but equally cold. "Clean this up properly." Maya's blood turned to ice water. Victor. The name hit her like a physical blow, triggering a flash of memory, a man's face contorted with rage, his hand raised to strike. The image vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving her gasping and disoriented. The footsteps were moving closer. She had to move, had to get back to the cabin and grab whatever evidence she could before they found her. The documents, the photographs, the laptop, they held answers to questions she was only beginning to formulate. She waited until the footsteps receded, then broke from cover, sprinting low between the trees. Branches whipped at her face and caught at her clothes, but she pushed forward, driven by desperation and a growing fury she didn't fully understand. Someone had stolen her life, her memories, her very identity. They'd left her to rot on the streets while living off what was rightfully hers. The cabin's back door was still ajar. Maya slipped inside, her eyes adjusting to the lamplight. The photographs lay where she'd dropped them, scattered across the hardwood like fallen leaves. She began gathering them frantically, stuffing them into her jacket pockets, along with the most important-looking documents. The laptop was still open on the desk, its screen casting an eerie blue glow. She grabbed it, surprised by its weight, then paused. On the screen was an email program, and in the inbox were dozens of unread messages. Her hands trembling, she clicked on the most recent one. Time is running out. They know about the Ashford account. You need to surface soon, or everything we worked for dies with you. The board meeting is next week. M. Ashford. Another name that sparked recognition without context. Maya scrolled down to older emails, scanning desperately for clues, legal documents, financial statements, references to something called the Clearwater Project. Numbers that made her head spin, millions of dollars flowing through accounts she apparently controlled. A floorboard creaked on the front porch. Maya slammed the laptop shut and looked around wildly. The cabin felt like a fishbowl now, all those windows that had seemed so welcoming now exposing her to anyone outside. She needed another way out, but the men were already at the front door. The doorknob turned slowly. Without thinking, Maya dove toward the kitchen area, remembering glimpsing a door there earlier. Her fingers found the handle just as the front door burst open. Behind the kitchen door lay a narrow pantry, barely large enough for her to squeeze into. She pulled the door shut behind her just as heavy boots thundered across the cabin floor. "Search everything," the gravelly voice commanded. If she was here, she might have found something. Through the thin door, Maya could hear them ransacking the place. Drawers being yanked open, papers rustling, furniture scraping across the floor. The laptop, they would find the laptop. "Here," the younger voice said. She was definitely here. "The computer's still warm. What's on it? Give me a second." "Shit. Victor's not going to like this. She's been reading the emails." Maya pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle her breathing. Victor. There was that name again, and this time the memory that surfaced was clearer. A boardroom, voices raised in anger, the feeling of walls closing in around her, and underneath it all, a crushing sense of betrayal by someone she'd trusted completely. "Burn it all," the gravelly voice ordered. "Cabin, documents, everything. Make it look like an accident." The acrid smell of gasoline began to fill the air. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she studied the faces staring back at her through time. The woman in the center, herself, she now knew, stood between two men in expensive suits outside what looked like a government building. They all wore the confident smiles of people who believed they were untouchable. Dr. Sarah Chen. The name felt foreign on her tongue, yet something deep inside her recognized it like an echo from a dream. She set the photo down and reached for the next item in the manila folder, a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Biotech Whistleblower Dies in Car Accident." Her own obituary. The article was brief, clinical. Dr. Sarah Chen, former researcher at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, had died when her vehicle skidded off a rain-slicked road 3 years ago. The same Dr. Chen who had allegedly stolen proprietary research before her death. The same woman who now sat in a hidden cabin, very much alive, with no memory of who she'd been. A sound outside made her freeze, the soft crunch of footsteps on fallen leaves, careful and deliberate. She quickly gathered the documents, her heart hammering against her ribs. The footsteps circled the cabin slowly, as if whoever was out there was taking inventory, planning. Sarah crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. A figure in dark clothing moved between the trees, just visible in the dying light. Then another figure appeared from the opposite direction. They were surrounding her. She backed away from the window, clutching the folder to her chest. The burner phone Michael had given her sat on the table, but who could she call? The police would never believe her story, and Michael, she still wasn't sure she could trust him completely. The front door handle rattled. Sarah grabbed the emergency bag from under the kitchen sink. Apparently her former self had been paranoid enough to prepare for this scenario. Inside were cash, another phone, and a small pistol that felt surprisingly familiar in her hands. Muscle memory, perhaps, from a life she couldn't remember. "Dr. Chen," a voice called from outside, cultured and patient. "We know you're in there, we just want to talk." She recognized something in that voice, a cold authority that made her skin crawl. Through the back window, she could see more figures emerging from the tree line, at least 4 of them now, maybe more. "You have something that belongs to us," the voice continued. "The research you took. We're prepared to be reasonable about this." Research. The newspaper had mentioned stolen research, but what had she taken? And why couldn't she remember any of it? Sarah's head throbbed as she tried to force the memories to surface, but there was only emptiness where her past should be. She heard the soft scraping of tools against the front door lock. They weren't planning to wait much longer for an invitation. Moving quickly, Sarah stuffed the documents into the emergency bag and slung it over her shoulder. The cabin had seemed like a sanctuary hours ago, but now it felt like a trap. She needed to reach the woods before they broke through. The lock clicked open, just as she slipped out the back door. The evening air was sharp against her face as she ran, keeping low and moving toward the darkest part of the forest. Behind her, she heard the cabin door bang open, followed by angry voices and the beam of flashlights cutting through the darkness. "She's not here. Check the back." She can't have gone far. Sarah pressed herself against a massive pine tree, trying to control her breathing. The emergency bag felt heavier with each step, but she couldn't abandon it now. It might contain the only clues to who she really was. A flashlight beam swept past her hiding spot, missing her by inches. She waited until it moved on, then continued deeper into the woods. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every snapping twig under her feet sounded like a gunshot in the silence. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, she reached what looked like an old hunting trail. The voices behind her had faded, but she knew they wouldn't give up easily. Whatever she had taken from Meridian Pharmaceuticals was worth killing for. Sarah pulled out the burner phone and dialed Michael's number. It rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Where are you?" she whispered urgently. "About 10 minutes out. Are you safe?" They found the cabin. There were at least 4 of them, maybe more. She looked back toward where orange light flickered between the trees. They were searching the cabin with lanterns now. "Michael, I found documents. I know who I used to be. Don't say anything else over the phone. There's an old bridge about half a mile north of your location. Can you make it there?" Sarah oriented herself using the North Star. a skill that had apparently survived her memory loss, along with her ability to handle weapons. "I'll find it." "Sarah?" Michael's voice carried a warning she'd never heard before. "Trust no one else. What you discovered tonight, it's bigger than you know." The weight of the rifle felt foreign yet familiar in Sarah's hands as she positioned herself behind the overturned table. Through the cabin's front window, she could see shadows moving between the trees, at least 3 figures approaching with tactical precision. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing remained steady, controlled by instincts she didn't remember learning. Marcus crouched beside her, his own weapon trained on the back entrance. "They're professionals," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Military training, most likely." Sarah's finger traced the rifle's safety mechanism without conscious thought, muscle memory guiding her movements. How many times had she done this before? How many times had she been the hunter instead of the hunted? The first shot shattered the front window, sending glass cascading across the wooden floor. Sarah rolled left as splinters erupted from the wall where her head had been seconds before. She returned fire through the broken window, her aim true despite the chaos flooding her mind. A grunt of pain from the tree line told her she'd found her mark. "Sarah? We need to move," Marcus called out, ejecting his spent magazine. "They're trying to flank us." But Sarah was already moving, her body responding to tactical training buried deep in her subconscious. She belly-crawled toward the cabin's side window, keeping low as bullets splintered the air above her. Through the glass, she spotted a figure in black tactical gear moving toward the cabin's blind spot. Without hesitation, she took the shot. The figure dropped. "2 down," she reported, surprised by the coldness in her own voice. This wasn't Sarah, the homeless woman, speaking. This was someone else entirely, someone whose hands didn't shake when taking a life. Marcus stared at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're remembering." "Not remembering," Sarah replied, reloading with practiced efficiency. "Just knowing." A smoke grenade crashed through the remaining front window, hissing as grey clouds began filling the cabin. Sarah's eyes watered, but she kept her position, listening for footsteps over the sound of her own breathing, filtered through her shirt pulled up over her nose. The attack came from both sides simultaneously. 2 figures burst through the front door, while another crashed through the back. Marcus engaged the rear attacker, their bodies grappling in the smoky haze. Sarah swung her rifle toward the front, but one of the intruders was already on top of her. Hands closed around her throat. Sarah dropped her weapon and drove her elbow backward into her attacker's ribs, then grabbed his wrist and twisted with a violence that surprised them both. The man's arm broke with a wet snap, and Sarah spun, driving her knee into his solar plexus. He collapsed, gasping. The second attacker raised his pistol toward Marcus's back. Sarah dove for her rifle, rolled, and fired in one fluid motion. The bullet caught him center mass, spinning him around before he crumpled to the floor. Sudden silence filled the cabin, broken only by the hissing smoke and labored breathing. Marcus stood over his attacker's still form, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. "Is that all of them?" Sarah asked, moving to the windows to scan the tree line. Marcus checked the bodies methodically, searching pockets and removing weapons. "For now, but they'll send more. These were just the advance team." Sarah examined one of the fallen men. Clean-shaven, military-bearing even in death, expensive tactical gear. "Who are they working for?" "The same people who wanted you dead 15 years ago." Marcus held up a satellite phone he'd pulled from one of the bodies. "The same people who are going to be very unhappy when this team doesn't report back." Sarah felt something shift inside her mind, like tumblers clicking into place in a long-locked safe. Images flashed. A laboratory, documents stamped with red classifications, faces of men in expensive suits discussing her fate around a polished conference table. The memories were fragments, incomplete, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. "They used me," she said, the words emerging from some deep well of knowledge. "Whatever I knew, whatever I did for them, when I became a liability, they tried to erase me." Marcus nodded grimly, and they almost succeeded. The memory suppression was supposed to be permanent, but being here, in this place where it all started, it's breaking down their conditioning. Sarah picked up the dead man's rifle, checking the action with professional competence. How long do we have? Maybe an hour before they realize the team is compromised. Less if they were supposed to check in regularly. She moved toward the cabin's hidden safe, her fingers working the combination lock with certainty born from repetition. Inside, beneath the cash and documents, lay additional weapons and ammunition, tools she'd apparently cached for exactly this scenario. "Then we don't wait for them to come to us," Sarah said, loading magazines with mechanical precision. "We take the fight to them." Marcus watched her transformation with growing unease. "Sarah, you don't understand what you're suggesting. These people have resources, connections, and I have something they don't expect," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying a new edge of steel. "I remember how they think." The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the morning stillness like a blade. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she peered through the cabin's front window, watching dust clouds rise from the forest road. 3 black SUVs moved in formation, their tinted windows reflecting the early sunlight like dead eyes. "They found us," Marcus whispered from behind her, his voice barely audible. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each one ending in capture or death. The cabin that had promised answers now felt like a trap, its walls closing in around them. She grabbed the leather journal from the coffee table, stuffing it into her jacket along with the photographs. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't let them reclaim her stolen memories. "Is there another way out?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Marcus nodded toward the back of the cabin. "There's a trail through the woods, but it's steep. If we can make it to the ravine—" The rumble of engines grew closer. Sarah could see figures moving in the lead vehicle, shadows behind bulletproof glass. Her fingers instinctively went to the scar on her temple, the phantom pain sharp and immediate. These people had tried to erase her once. She wouldn't give them a second chance. They slipped out the cabin's rear door, moving low across the small clearing. The morning air carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth, but underneath it all lurked something else, the metallic smell of approaching violence. Sarah's feet found the narrow trail as if by instinct, muscle memory guiding her through terrain she'd supposedly never seen. Behind them, car doors slammed shut, voices carried on the wind, clipped and professional, military precision. Sarah recognized the tone even if the words remained unclear. She'd heard it before, in fragments of dreams that weren't dreams at all. The trail descended sharply, winding between ancient trees whose canopy filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. Marcus moved beside her with surprising grace for someone his age, but she could hear his labored breathing. The years hadn't been kind to either of them. "How long have you been watching over me?" she asked as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of loose rocks. "Since the day you disappeared from that hospital in Portland," he replied, pausing to catch his breath. Richard's final orders were clear: keep you safe, keep you hidden. Even from yourself if necessary. A shout echoed from above. Their pursuers had found the trail. Sarah pushed harder, her legs burning as the descent grew steeper. The sound of the ravine's rushing water grew louder, promising both salvation and danger. The drop was significant, the rocks below unforgiving. "Tell me about the night it happened," she demanded, using her anger to fuel her movement down the treacherous path. "The night they took everything from me." Marcus stumbled, caught himself against a tree trunk. "You walked into that warehouse thinking you were meeting an informant. Instead, you found Brennan and his entire operation laid out like a spider's web. Chemical weapons, human trafficking, enough evidence to bring down half the government contractors in the region." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Sarah could almost see it, her younger self, naive enough to believe in justice, walking into what she thought was the story of a lifetime. Instead, she'd found her own death warrant. "Brennan was there?" she asked. "Waiting for you. They'd known about your investigation for weeks, fed you just enough truth to lead you exactly where they wanted you." Marcus's voice cracked with old guilt. "Richard tried to warn you. But the communication lines had been compromised. By the time backup arrived, the warehouse was burning and you were already in the wind. They reached the ravine's edge. Below them, white water crashed over rocks worn smooth by centuries of erosion. On the far side, the forest continued unbroken for miles. It was 20 feet across, maybe 30 to the rocks below. Survivable, if they were lucky. They made it look like you died in the fire, Marcus continued. Richard pulled strings, called in favors, created the Jessica Parker identity while you recovered in a private facility. But someone had scrambled your brain with drugs, trauma, psychological conditioning. You couldn't remember who you were, let alone what you'd discovered. The pursuing voices grew closer. Sarah could hear them moving through the underbrush, coordinated and relentless. She thought of the homeless camps, the years of existing in the margins of society, invisible and forgotten. It had been protection even if she hadn't known it. "And now they know I'm alive," she said. "Now they know you're remembering." Marcus met her eyes. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sarah looked across the ravine, then back at the forest where shadows moved between the trees. Armed figures in tactical gear, faces hidden behind masks and visors. Professional killers sent to finish what they'd started years ago. She stepped back from the edge, her decision crystallizing like ice in her veins. She was done running from a past they'd stolen from her. It was time to take it back. The warehouse smelled of rust and forgotten dreams. Maya pressed herself against the cold brick wall, listening to the footsteps echo through the cavernous space above. 3 sets, maybe 4. They'd found her faster than she'd expected. Her fingers traced the USB drive in her pocket, the one she'd pulled from the cabin's hidden compartment just hours before the explosion. Whatever was on it had been worth killing Dr. Elizabeth Vance for, worth hunting Maya across 3 states, worth burning down the only home she'd ever truly known. A beam of light swept across the floor 10 feet away. Maya held her breath, counting heartbeats. The Meridian Group had resources she couldn't match, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what a woman with nothing left to lose could accomplish. "She's here somewhere," a voice called out. Male, authoritative. "The tracker shows her phone signal went dead in this sector." Maya almost smiled. She'd learned that trick from a kid in Seattle. Smash the phone, leave the pieces scattered in a dumpster 2 blocks away. Let them chase shadows while she planned her next move. The footsteps moved deeper into the warehouse. Maya waited until the silence stretched taut before sliding along the wall toward the emergency exit she'd spotted during her reconnaissance. The metal door was rusted but functional. She tested the handle, unlocked. Sometimes the universe offered small mercies. Outside, the industrial district sprawled in all directions like a concrete maze, perfect for disappearing. Maya pulled up the hood of her stolen jacket and melted into the shadows between buildings. She had maybe an hour before they expanded their search radius. The internet cafe on Morrison Street stayed open all night, catering to insomniacs and people with nowhere else to go. Maya paid cash for 30 minutes of computer time and claimed a terminal in the back corner where she could watch both entrances. The USB drive felt heavy as she slotted it into the port. Files cascaded across the screen. Financial records, encrypted communications, personnel files. But one folder made her blood freeze, Project Tabula Rasa. Her fingers trembled as she clicked it open. Medical records filled the screen, experimental procedures, memory suppression protocols, and there, in stark black and white, her own name, Dr. Maya Chen, lead researcher. The room tilted. She'd been one of them, not just a victim, an architect of her own destruction. The files painted a picture she couldn't reconcile with the fragments of memory she'd recovered. She'd developed the memory suppression technology for Meridian, believing it would help trauma victims, but they'd perverted her work, using it to create untraceable assets, killers who couldn't remember their crimes, witnesses who couldn't testify. When she'd tried to expose them, they'd used her own creation against her, wiped her clean and dumped her on the streets like garbage. Except something had gone wrong. The memories had started bleeding back. Jesus, Maya whispered, scrolling through test subject files. Dozens of them. Men and women reduced to empty shells, their personalities sculpted to serve Meridian's purposes. Some had been homeless, people society wouldn't miss. Others had been employees who'd asked too many questions. A photograph caught her attention. A man with kind eyes and greying temples. Dr. James Harrison, the file read. Terminated after expressing ethical concerns regarding Project Tabula Rasa. Maya's chest constricted. She remembered him now. They'd been partners, maybe more than partners. He'd tried to protect her. The next photo made her stomach lurch. James, months later, vacant-eyed and hollow. They'd broken him with her own technology. Maya's hands shook as she copied the files to a new drive. This couldn't just be about revenge anymore. Those test subjects, the ones still alive, deserved their memories back, their lives back. A shadow fell across her terminal. Maya's muscles tensed as she palmed the USB drive, ready to run. Don't turn around. The voice was soft, female. I'm not with them. Then, who are you? Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time. My name is Dr. Sarah Kim. I worked with you at Meridian before everything went to hell. Maya's memory stirred. Sarah, brilliant, idealistic, always asking uncomfortable questions during ethics reviews. They think I'm dead, Sarah continued. Car accident, very convenient. But I've been tracking their operations, gathering evidence. You're the key to bringing them down, Maya. You're the only one who understands the technology well enough to reverse it. Why should I trust you? Because I have something you need. Sarah slid a small device across the counter, James's real memories. I extracted them before they destroyed him completely. He's still in there, Maya, they all are, but we're running out of time. Maya picked up the device, feeling its weight like a promise of redemption. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The Meridian Group's reach was closing around them. There's a place we can go, Sarah said. Underground, literally. The old subway tunnels have people like us, the forgotten ones, the disappeared. They'll help. Maya stood, pocketing both drives. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something other than fear. Purpose, direction, lead the way. The basement felt like a tomb, silent except for the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Sarah pressed herself against the cold stone wall, clutching the flash drive Marcus had given her. Above, she could hear footsteps moving methodically through the cabin, searching. Her breath came in shallow puffs, visible in the frigid air. The memories that had flooded back upstairs still felt like fragments of someone else's life. Dr. Sarah Chen, brilliant researcher, loving wife, trusted colleague, the woman who had discovered something so dangerous that her own husband had orchestrated her destruction. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Sarah held her breath, willing herself to become invisible. A muffled voice spoke, too quiet to make out words, but she recognized the tone of authority. David was here. Her husband, no, her would-be killer, had finally tracked her down. The beam of a flashlight suddenly cut through the darkness at the top of the basement stairs. Sarah shrank deeper into the shadows, grateful for the cluttered storage shelves that provided cover. Boxes of old research files, equipment she couldn't identify, and what looked like survival supplies created a maze of hiding spots. She's been here, David's voice carried down the stairs, clear now and chillingly familiar. The place is warm, food's been touched, another voice responded, younger, eager. Want me to check the basement, Dr. Hartwell? Sarah's blood turned to ice. Even after everything, hearing him called doctor, while she'd spent 2 years as a nameless vagrant, made her stomach clench with rage. But the anger sharpened her focus. She eased deeper into the shadows, careful not to disturb anything that might give away her position. Footsteps descended the wooden stairs, each creak like a gunshot in the silence. The flashlight beam swept back and forth, casting wild shadows on the walls. Sarah pressed herself behind a tall metal cabinet, making herself as small as possible. Lot of junk down here. the younger voice said. Why would she hide all this stuff? Because she was paranoid, David's voice came from the top of the stairs. Always thought someone was watching her, plotting against her. Ironic, really. The beam passed inches from Sarah's hiding spot. She could see the man now. Young, muscular, probably former military by the way he moved. One of David's new security team, no doubt. The kind of person who asked few questions as long as the pay was good. Check everything, David commanded. She might have left something useful. Research notes, backup files. Sarah was always meticulous about documentation. The man began systematically searching the shelves. Sarah realized with growing horror that he was working his way toward her hiding spot. In minutes, he'd find her. She needed another option. Her eyes had adjusted enough to make out the layout of the basement. To her right, she could see what looked like another room, partially hidden behind hanging plastic sheeting. If she could reach it without making noise. The searcher's back was turned as he rifled through boxes. Sarah took her chance, moving in a low crouch toward the plastic barrier. Her foot caught on something, a loose board or maybe a tool, and it scraped against the concrete floor. The flashlight beam swung toward the sound immediately. "Did you hear something?" David called down. "Maybe." Checking it out. Sarah dove through the plastic sheeting just as the light hit where she'd been standing. She found herself in what appeared to be a workshop, tools hanging on pegboard walls, a workbench covered with electronic equipment, and there, in the far corner, another set of stairs leading up, a back exit. Sarah had built herself an escape route, even if she couldn't remember doing it. Behind her, she heard the plastic rustling as the searcher pushed through. No more time for stealth. She sprinted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. The door at the top was heavy wood, secured with multiple locks, but her fingers seemed to know the combinations automatically. "She's here!" the man shouted. "Boss, she's down here!" The door opened onto a root cellar behind the cabin, camouflaged with brush and fallen logs. Sarah emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, the cold hitting her like a physical blow. Snow had begun falling, large flakes that would cover her tracks if she could get far enough away. The cabin erupted with activity behind her. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as they realized she'd escaped. Sarah clutched the flash drive tighter and ran for the tree line. Whatever was on this drive, Marcus had died trying to get it to her. She couldn't let that sacrifice be meaningless. "Find her!" David's voice carried across the clearing, no longer the warm tone she remembered from their marriage. This was the voice of a man who killed without hesitation. She can't have gotten far. And remember, we need her alive until we know what she's told others. Sarah reached the woods and kept running, branches tearing at her clothes, snow soaking through her inadequate shoes. She was Dr. Sarah Chen again, but she was also still a homeless woman fighting for survival. The combination might just keep her alive. The warehouse smelled of rust and decades-old motor oil. Sarah crouched behind a stack of shipping crates, her heart hammering against her ribs as footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. 3 sets, maybe 4. They moved with military precision, spreading out to cover every possible escape route. "We know you're here, Elena." Marcus's voice carried across the empty space, calm and conversational. "There's nowhere left to run." Elena. The name still felt foreign on her tongue, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit. But the memories were coming faster now, triggered by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She remembered this feeling, the hunt, the calculated breathing, the way her mind automatically catalogued every shadow and sound. A beam of light swept past her hiding spot. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the darkness, her fingers finding the cold metal of the USB drive in her pocket. The evidence Dr. Kovac had died protecting. The reason her husband had erased her mind and left her for dead. "You always were stubborn," Marcus continued, his voice closer now. "Even when we were married, even when I tried to explain why Project Mindbridge was necessary." The memories hit her like physical blows. Marcus in a lab coat, his eyes bright with ambition as he showed her brain scans on a computer screen. Her own voice, younger and full of trust. "You're talking about weaponizing memory loss. Do you understand what that could do to innocent people?" His response echoed across the years. "Sometimes innocent people are acceptable casualties for the greater good." Sarah's jaw clenched. She remembered now why she'd stolen those files, why she'd risked everything to expose what Helios Corporation was really doing. They weren't just experimenting on homeless people and prisoners. They were planning to sell memory manipulation technology to the highest bidders, dictators, terrorists, anyone willing to pay for the ability to erase inconvenient witnesses or implant false memories. A scraping sound to her left made her freeze. One of Marcus's men was working his way through the maze of machinery, his tactical flashlight cutting through the gloom. Sarah counted his steps, timing his movement. When he passed her position, she slipped out from behind the crates and moved deeper into the warehouse. "Your friend Kovac thought he could hide what we'd done," Marcus called out. "Thought he could develop some kind of reversal treatment. We let him try, of course. His research was valuable, but when he decided to play hero," the sound of Marcus clicking his tongue carried through the darkness. "Well, you saw how that ended." Sarah's throat tightened. David Kovac had been trying to help her remember, trying to undo what they'd done to her mind, and they'd killed him for it. She reached a loading dock at the far end of the warehouse. Moonlight filtered through dirty windows, casting everything in silver and black. Her reflection in a broken mirror caught her eye. Wild hair, dirt-streaked face, eyes that had seen too much. But underneath the homeless woman's exterior, she could see glimpses of who she used to be. Dr. Elena Vasquez, neuroscientist, whistleblower, the woman who'd tried to stop them. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus said. His voice was much closer now, maybe 30 feet away. "You think you can expose us, bring us down like some kind of action movie hero, but you're forgetting something important." Sarah pressed herself against the loading dock door, testing the handle. Locked. "You're still technically dead," Marcus continued. "No identity, no credentials, no one who'd believe your story. And that USB drive? It's encrypted with technology that won't exist for another 5 years. Even if you handed it to the FBI tomorrow, they couldn't read it." The footsteps were getting closer. Sarah could hear at least 3 different men moving through the warehouse, tightening the circle. She looked up at the windows above the loading dock, too high to reach, and probably locked anyway. "But I'm feeling generous tonight," Marcus said. "Maybe it's nostalgia for our marriage. Maybe it's professional respect for your work. Walk out now, hands up, and I'll make it quick." "You have my word." Sarah almost laughed. His word. She remembered other promises he'd made, to love and cherish her, to use his research only for healing, to never hurt innocent people. She'd believed him once. It had nearly destroyed the world. A shadow moved past the windows above. Sarah's breath caught. For a moment she thought it might be another of Marcus's men, but the movement was wrong, too quick, too fluid. Someone else was here. The lights in the warehouse suddenly died, plunging everything into complete darkness. "What the hell?" one of the men shouted. Gunfire erupted from somewhere above. Muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Sarah heard bodies hitting the floor, shouts of confusion and pain. In the chaos, a rope dropped down beside the loading dock window. A familiar voice called down through the darkness, "Elena, move!" The warehouse reeked of motor oil and rust, its broken windows casting fractured moonlight across the concrete floor. Sarah pressed herself against a support beam, clutching the flash drive that contained everything. Her father's research, the pharmaceutical trials, the deaths they'd covered up. Marcus had been right about one thing. Some secrets were worth killing for. Footsteps echoed from the entrance. 3 sets, maybe 4. She'd managed to stay ahead of Blackwood's team for 6 hours, but they were closing in. The abandoned industrial district offered plenty of hiding spots, but it was also a maze with limited exits. Her phone buzzed. A text from Detective Hayes. "Where are you? We found Dr. Chen's body. This is bigger than we thought." Sarah's blood ran cold. Dr. Chen had been her father's research partner, the one person who might have corroborated her story. Now he was dead, and she was running out of allies. "Sarah Chen Williams." The voice boomed through the warehouse, amplified by hidden speakers. "Blackwood, I know you're here. Let's discuss this like civilized people." She almost laughed at the absurdity. Civilized people didn't murder researchers who discovered their drug trials were causing brain hemorrhages in children. Civilized people didn't fake someone's death and steal 15 years of their life. "Your father was brilliant," Blackwood continued, his voice echoing off the metal rafters. "But he lacked vision. He saw a few adverse reactions and wanted to scrap everything. Billions in research, thousands of jobs, medical breakthroughs that could help millions, all thrown away because of a handful of casualties." Sarah moved carefully between the machinery, working her way toward the back exit. She knew Blackwood was talking to buy time, to keep her in one place while his men surrounded the building. "You could have lived quietly," he said. "We gave you a new identity, a clean slate. But you had to go digging, didn't you? Had to play detective." A shadow moved past one of the windows, someone on the fire escape. Sarah ducked behind an overturned conveyor belt, her heart hammering. The exit was 50 yards away, but she'd have to cross open ground to reach it. "The irony is delicious," Blackwood's voice took on a conversational tone. "Your own father's research made it possible. The memory suppression compound he developed, we perfected it. One injection, and Sarah Williams died in that car crash. May became just another homeless woman with trauma-induced amnesia. Poetic justice." The footsteps were getting closer. Sarah spotted a maintenance tunnel near the far wall, a drain large enough to crawl through. It might lead to the storm sewers beneath the district. She took a breath and sprinted. Gunfire erupted behind her, muzzle flashes lighting up the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Bullets sparked off concrete and metal as Sarah dove for the tunnel opening. She squeezed inside just as more shots rang out, concrete chips raining down around the entrance. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare of rust and spider webs, but it angled downward toward the main sewer line. Sarah crawled as fast as she could, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind her. Someone was shouting orders. They'd found the tunnel. She emerged into a larger pipe filled with ankle-deep water that reeked of chemicals and decay. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow. Sarah turned left, following the flow of water toward the treatment plant. If she could reach the surface near the municipal building, she might find help. Behind her, a flashlight beam pierced the tunnel entrance. They were coming. Sarah ran through the sewers, splashing through puddles and dodging hanging cables. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she pushed forward. The pharmaceutical company had taken everything from her once, her identity, her memories, her life. She wouldn't let them do it again. A ladder appeared ahead, leading up to a manhole cover. Sarah climbed quickly, pushing against the heavy metal disc. It budged slightly, not locked. She heaved it aside and pulled herself up into an alley behind the police station. Detective Hayes was waiting for her. "Thank God," he breathed, helping her out of the sewer. "We've been tracking Blackwood's people all night. How much evidence do you have?" Sarah held up the flash drive. "Everything. Clinical trial data, cover-up documents, financial records, enough to bring down the whole operation." Hayes nodded grimly. "Dr. Chen managed to upload files to a secure server before they killed him. Combined with your evidence, we can—" The detective's words were cut off by the sharp crack of a sniper rifle. Hayes stumbled backward, blood spreading across his chest. Sarah spun around to see Blackwood emerging from a black SUV flanked by 2 armed men. "I really hoped it wouldn't come to this," Blackwood said, walking toward her with casual confidence. "But you've made yourself quite inconvenient, haven't you, May?" Sarah backed against the alley wall, still clutching the flash drive. Hayes was down but breathing, reaching weakly for his radio. The game was almost over, but she had one card left to play. The warehouse smelled of rust and decay. its broken windows casting fractured moonlight across the concrete floor. Sarah pressed her back against a support beam, Marcus beside her, both breathing hard from their desperate flight through the industrial district. The USB drive felt like a burning coal in her pocket, the evidence that could destroy the consortium if they lived long enough to use it. "They're surrounding the building," Marcus whispered, peering around the beam. Red laser dots danced across the far wall like deadly fireflies. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the fragmented memories wash over her. This place felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. The layout, the shadows, something about it triggered a response she couldn't quite grasp. Then it hit her like a physical blow. "I've been here before," she breathed. "When I was Elena Cross." Marcus turned to her, his face tense. "What do you remember?" "A meeting. Blackwood brought me here to show me something." She moved deeper into the warehouse, her feet carrying her with increasing certainty. There was a room, hidden. The sound of boots on gravel outside grew closer. Flashlight beams began probing through the windows, creating moving shadows that danced across the walls like phantoms. Sarah reached the back corner of the warehouse, her hands searching along what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. Her fingers found a section that felt different, smoother. She pressed, and a panel slid aside with a soft click. "How did you—" Marcus started, but she was already pulling him through the opening. The hidden room beyond was smaller than the main warehouse, but equipped with sophisticated electronics that still hummed with power. Banks of monitors lined one wall, and filing cabinets filled another. But what made Sarah's breath catch was the wall of photographs. Surveillance images, spanning years, all focused on one target. Herself. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered, staring at the images. "They've been watching you since you were a child." Sarah moved closer to the photographs, her heart hammering. Pictures of her as Elena Cross, but also earlier images. A young woman in college, a teenager at what looked like a science fair, even a child with pigtails standing beside a man she now recognized as her father. "The formula," she said suddenly. "It wasn't just something I discovered, it was something I inherited." A thick file folder sat on the central desk, labeled Project Tabula Rasa. Sarah opened it with trembling hands. The documents inside told a story that made her stomach turn. Her father, Dr. Richard Novak, had been a biochemist working on memory manipulation for the military. He'd discovered something revolutionary, a compound that could not only erase memories, but restructure them entirely, creating false personalities that were indistinguishable from real ones. "They killed him for it," Sarah said, her voice hollow as she read the clinical reports. "When he tried to quit the project, they eliminated him and came for me." Marcus was studying a schematic on one of the monitors. "Sarah, look at this. The compound your father developed. It's not just about memory erasure. It can be used to create perfect sleeper agents, people who have no idea what they really are." The sound of breaking glass echoed from the main warehouse. Their pursuers had found them. Sarah grabbed more files from the desk, stuffing them into her jacket. "There's something else," she said, scanning a document marked Termination Protocol. "The process that created my Sarah identity, it was designed to be reversible, but only once. If they try to wipe my memories again, what happens? Complete neural breakdown, brain death." The hidden door behind them exploded inward as armed figures poured through. Sarah recognized the lead man immediately, Vincent Torres, Blackwood's chief enforcer. His scarred face wore an expression of cold satisfaction. "Elena Cross," he said, his weapon trained on her chest. "You've led us quite a chase." "I'm not Elena anymore," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Torres smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "That can be corrected. The process that made you into Sarah was always meant to be temporary, a way to keep you docile until we needed Elena's knowledge again. Knowledge that died with my father. No, Elena, the complete formula is locked away in your original memories, the ones we suppressed but didn't destroy. We need you to remember everything, just long enough to recreate your father's work. Marcus stepped protectively closer to Sarah. And then what? You kill her? Then we complete what should have been finished 3 years ago. Sarah felt something shifting in her mind. Not memories returning, but a clarity she'd never experienced. The woman she'd been as Elena, the person she'd become as Sarah, they weren't separate identities. They were pieces of the same whole, artificially divided. You made one mistake, she said to Torres. What's that? Sarah smiled, her hand moving slowly toward the emergency fire suppression system she'd noticed on the wall. You taught Elena to be a weapon, but you never taught Sarah to be afraid. She slammed her palm against the alarm. The warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows filtering moonlight across concrete floors stained with decades of neglect. Maya pressed her back against a support beam, the Volkov files clutched against her chest like armor. Her breath came in short bursts, each exhale visible in the frigid air. Footsteps echoed from the entrance, deliberate, unhurried. They knew she was trapped. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Victor's voice carried across the empty space, her real name rolling off his tongue like a curse. 20 years we believed you were dead. 20 years of searching for what you stole from us. Maya's fingers trembled as she touched the scar beneath her hairline, the one she'd always assumed came from some accident in her forgotten past. Now she knew better. The experimental memory suppression procedure had left its mark, just as it had stolen everything she once was. You remember now, don't you? Victor continued, his footsteps growing closer. Remember the laboratory in Prague? The bioweapons research? The night you decided to play hero? Fragments of memories crashed together in her mind. Sterile corridors, computer screens filled with genetic sequences, the weight of moral certainty as she copied classified files. She'd been a scientist once, a brilliant researcher who discovered something monstrous hidden within legitimate pharmaceutical research. I remember enough, Maya called out, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I remember what you were planning to do with my work. A laugh echoed from somewhere near the loading docks. Your work? Dr. Vasquez, you were merely one component of a much larger machine. Did you really think your little act of conscience would stop us? Maya crept along the wall, staying low behind abandoned machinery. The warehouse stretched before her like a maze of shadows and hiding spots, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Through a gap in the metal beams, she spotted movement. 2 figures positioned near the exits, cutting off her escape routes. The beauty of your disappearance, Victor continued, was that it taught us valuable lessons about operational security. We adapted, evolved. The weapon you tried to expose, it's been refined, perfected. Your martyrdom accomplished nothing. The weight of those words settled in her chest like lead. All these years of running, of living as a ghost while others paid the price for her choices. Sarah's death, Marcus lying broken in a hospital bed, all of it meaningless if the weapon still existed. Maya closed her eyes and forced herself to think like the scientist she'd once been. The warehouse was a closed system with multiple variables. She had limited resources but intimate knowledge of what the Volkov group truly feared: exposure. She pulled out her burner phone, the screen's glow hidden by her cupped hand. The journalist contact Dr. Reeves had mentioned sat in her recent calls list, a lifeline she'd been too afraid to use. But fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her thumb hovered over the number as Victor's voice grew closer. We know you have the files, Elena, but they're incomplete without you. 20 years of technological advancement means nothing if we don't have the original research data locked away in that brilliant mind of yours. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. They didn't just want the stolen files, they needed her alive, needed to extract the suppressed memories that contained the weapon's foundational research. The memory suppression hadn't destroyed the information, it had simply buried it beyond conventional recall. Maya typed quickly, Dr. Elena Vasquez, Volkov Bioweapons Program, uploading files now. She attached the photographed documents and hit send, then immediately powered down the phone. "I'm afraid that won't be necessary," she called out, stepping into view near the center of the warehouse. Victor emerged from behind a concrete pillar, flanked by two operatives with weapons drawn. In the moonlight, she could see his face clearly for the first time, sharp features weathered by decades of violence, eyes that held no warmth. "The dramatic gesture is unnecessary, Dr. Vasquez. We both know you won't risk innocent lives by making this information public." Maya smiled, an expression that felt foreign after years of running. "You're right about one thing. I won't risk innocent lives, but you made a critical error in your assessment." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Which is, you assumed I still had something to lose." The warehouse lights exploded in a shower of sparks as Maya dove behind a conveyor belt, the darkness swallowing her completely. She heard shouts, running footsteps, the sharp crack of gunfire against concrete. But she was already moving, muscle memory from another life guiding her through the maze of machinery toward a destination she'd scouted hours earlier. The storm drain access was still where building schematics indicated it would be, hidden beneath a rusted grate near the warehouse's foundation. Behind her, Victor's voice rose above the chaos. "Find her. She's useless to us dead, but not everyone she cares about shares that protection." Maya's blood turned to ice. They knew about Marcus. The morning mist clung to the trees like smoke as Sarah crouched behind the abandoned ranger station, watching the cabin through Marcus's binoculars. They'd been waiting since dawn, and her muscles ached from the tension. 3 black SUVs had arrived an hour ago, disgorging men in tactical gear who now surrounded her sanctuary. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing to a figure emerging from the lead vehicle. "Vincent Carrera. I'd recognize that bastard anywhere." Sarah's blood ran cold. Even from this distance, she could see the predatory way he moved, the same calculated grace that had haunted her nightmares for 15 years. He wore an expensive suit despite the wilderness setting, as if this were just another business meeting. "He's got at least 12 men," Detective Morrison said, her voice barely audible through the radio earpiece. "SWAT's in position, but we need concrete evidence before we move." Sarah's fingers traced the USB drive in her pocket, the one Marcus had retrieved from the cabin's hidden safe. It contained everything: financial records, assassination orders, the names of politicians and judges on Carrera's payroll. But Morrison was right. They needed to catch him in the act, get him talking. "I'm going down there," Sarah said. Marcus grabbed her arm. "That's suicide. He wants me alive, remember? I'm the only one who can access my father's final insurance policy." She pulled away, checking the wire Morrison had given her. "Besides, you'll be listening." Before Marcus could protest further, Sarah was moving through the trees, her homeless woman's instincts serving her well as she navigated silently toward the cabin. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind was crystal clear for the first time in years. She emerged from the tree line with her hands raised, playing the part of a frightened vagrant who'd stumbled onto something beyond her understanding. The tactical team immediately converged on her, but Carrera raised a hand, stopping them. "Well, well." His voice was silk over steel, exactly as she remembered. "The prodigal daughter returns, though you look rather different than I expected, Elena." Hearing her real name spoken aloud after so many years was like a physical blow. She forced herself to maintain the trembling facade. I don't know what you're talking about. I just live here. This is my cabin." Carrera laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, my dear girl. We both know that's not entirely accurate, don't we? You may have convinced yourself you're just another homeless drifter, but your father's blood runs true. You found his little treasure trove, didn't you?" He gestured, and 2 men flanked her, escorting her toward the cabin. Inside, they'd torn the place apart, but she could see they hadn't found the real hiding spots. Her father had been too clever for that. 15 years I've searched for you," Carrera continued as they entered. 15 years wondering what Robert Castellanos told his precious daughter before he died, where he hid the evidence that could destroy everything I've built. "I don't remember my father," Sarah said, which was partially true. The memories were fragments, pieces of a shattered mirror slowly reflecting her past. Of course you don't. Amazing what trauma and the right pharmaceutical cocktail can do to a young mind. But the memories are still there, aren't they? Locked away, waiting for the right key. He pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. This should help. A reversal agent, you might say. It'll bring back everything we took from you. Sarah's carefully constructed facade began to crack as real terror flooded through her. She backed away, but the men grabbed her arms. "Please, I don't know anything." "Oh, but you do." Carrera approached slowly, savoring her fear. "Your father was my partner for 20 years. We built an empire together. But then he got squeamish, started talking about going to the authorities. He thought he could use his daughter as leverage against me." The needle gleamed in the cabin's dim light. "He hid something, Elena. Something that could expose every operation, every contact, every dirty dollar we've moved. He told you where it is before he died, and now you're going to remember." As the syringe drew closer to her neck, Sarah's mind raced. The memories were already returning on their own. Fragments of that terrible night, her father's desperate whispers, the location of his final secret. But she couldn't let Carrera know. Not yet. "Wait," she gasped. "If you're right, if I really am this Elena person, what makes you think I'll help you even if I remember?" Carrera paused, his cold eyes studying her face. "Because, my dear, if you don't, everyone you've come to care about in this pathetic little town will die, starting with that handsome reporter who's been playing guardian angel." Through the window, Sarah saw Marcus being dragged from the woods at gunpoint. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw the same determination in his gaze that she felt burning in her chest. The final game was beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows through the broken windows as Maya stood in the ruins of what had been her sanctuary. Smoke still curled from the charred remains of furniture, and the acrid smell of burned memories hung heavy in the air. But she was alive, and Marcus Holloway was not. Detective Rodriguez picked her way carefully through the debris, her expression grim. "We found 3 more bodies in the woods. Holloway's men." She paused beside Maya, studying her face. "You want to tell me what really happened here?" Maya touched the leather journal tucked inside her jacket, the one thing she'd managed to save from the flames. "I remembered who I am." "Dr. Sarah Chen," Rodriguez nodded. "We ran your prints through the system after we found Holloway's body. Officially, you died in a car accident 3 years ago, except here you are, very much alive." The weight of her real name felt strange on Maya's shoulders, like putting on clothes that no longer quite fit. She'd been Maya, the homeless woman, for so long that Sarah Chen felt like someone else's identity. The accident was staged. Marcus needed me to disappear so he could steal my research and claim it as his own. The viral research that's worth millions? Billions. Maya's voice was bitter. "I developed a breakthrough treatment for viral hemorrhagic fevers, diseases that kill thousands in developing countries. But Marcus saw dollar signs, not lives saved. He couldn't just buy me out or force me to sell. He needed me gone completely, along with any proof that the work was originally mine." Rodriguez pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. "We found his lab. Preliminary examination shows he was months away from bringing your treatment to market under his company's name. You would have been watching the news from the streets while he collected Nobel Prizes and pharmaceutical contracts." The irony wasn't lost on Maya. While she'd been scrounging for food in dumpsters and sleeping in doorways, Marcus had been preparing to become rich and famous using her life's work. The brilliant scientist she'd once been had been erased so thoroughly that even she had believed the erasure was real. "How did you survive the accident?" Rodriguez asked. Maya's fingers traced the scar along her hairline, hidden beneath unwashed hair for so long. "I was wearing my seatbelt, the airbag deployed. But the head trauma was severe, retrograde amnesia. When I woke up in the hospital, I had no identification, no memory of who I was. Marcus had people there waiting. They told the hospital I was a Jane Doe with no family, probably homeless. Easier to just discharge me to the streets than deal with the paperwork." "And you believed them?" "I had no choice. My memories were gone. I knew how to read, how to speak, basic survival skills, but everything personal, everything that made me Sarah Chen, was locked away. Maya's voice cracked slightly. For 3 years I lived as Maya. I thought that was my real name because it was the only thing that felt familiar. I didn't know it was just what Marcus used to call me when we were together, years before he decided I was worth more dead than alive. Rodriguez's radio crackled with updates from the crime scene team. She listened briefly, then looked back at Maya. They found Marcus's files, detailed plans for your disappearance, payment records to the people who staged the accident, even medical records showing he bribed hospital staff to ensure you'd be discharged without proper investigation. The evidence was overwhelming, but Maya felt no satisfaction in vindication. Too much had been lost, too much stolen. What happens now? Now? You're free. Officially, Sarah Chen is no longer dead. Your research is legally yours again. Marcus's company will face federal charges for fraud and attempted murder. You'll probably be rich within a year. Maya looked around the destroyed cabin, the place where she'd finally remembered herself, where she'd fought for her life and won. The woman who'd walked into these woods was gone, just as surely as the homeless woman named Maya had never really existed. But she wasn't quite ready to be Dr. Sarah Chen again either. I need time, she said quietly, to figure out who I am now. Rodriguez nodded, understanding in her eyes. We'll need your testimony, but that can wait. There are victim services, support programs. Thank you. Maya stepped carefully over the threshold where Marcus had fallen, where her old life had ended and something new had begun. But I think I need to find my own way forward. As they walked away from the ruins together, Maya felt the journal's weight against her ribs, her research, her memories, her proof of identity. The homeless woman who'd discovered this cabin was gone forever, but the person walking away carried the strength of someone who'd survived having everything stolen and had fought to reclaim it all. The trees whispered overhead, keeping their secrets, as Maya stepped back into a world where she finally knew exactly who she was.